everyone. Welcome to an afternoon of the words and music of Albert Murray. I'm Abby Wolf from the Hutchins Center, and we're delighted to bring this event to you today. And I just have a few words of thanks to say before we begin. This event would not be taking place without the unrelenting devotion of two men who are on this stage, Paul Devlin to my left and Lewis Jones to my right. You can read about their connections to Albert Murray in the program, and you'll also hear a little about that as they speak. But really, this wouldn't have happened without their drive and their desire to do this. Paul is the co-editor of the Library of America's volume of Albert Murray's writings that was published in December, I think, to great acclaim and great sales, and just wonderful. It was a wonderful moment in publishing, and it really put this writer who hasn't been read enough back into the public view in the way that Library of America often does. I also, of course, want to thank the musicians who will be here, and our own Professor Gates. And again, a special thank you to Library of America for really also making this possible and bringing out this book and keeping Albert Murray in public view right now. Cheryl Hurley is here, and she'll say a few words, and Elizabeth Smith from the Board of Library of America is in the audience, so thank you both. Special, huge thanks to the ART for sharing this set with us. So I don't think James Earl Jones is in the house right now, but this is the night of the Iguana set, and I haven't yet seen it, but I hope to, and I've heard that it's just fantastic. But I absolutely love this setting for this reading. It's a set for Albert Murray that you will never see again, so consider yourselves blessed. And I will exit this stage now, but what we'll hear for a few minutes is Albert Murray's own voice to set the stage. He will be reading the New York chapter of South to a Very Old Place. Thank you and welcome.
Such is the fundamental interrelationship of recollection and make-believe with all journeys and locations that anywhere people do certain things in a certain way can be home. The way certain very special uptown Manhattan people talk and the way some of them walk, for instance, makes them home folks. So whoever says you can't go home again when you are, for so many intents and purposes, back whenever or wherever somebody or something makes you feel that way. Sometimes, of course, all you need to do is hear pianos and trumpets and trombones talking in any part of town or anywhere else for that matter. Or sometimes it will be pianos and saxophones talking and bass fiddles walking, and you're all the way back even before you have time to realize how far away you're supposed to have gone, even before you become aware of even the slightest impulse to remember how much of it you thought perhaps you had long since forgotten. Sometimes it can be down-home church organs secularized to Kansas City 4/4 and a neighborhood cocktail lounge. It can be a Count Basie sonata suggesting blue steel locomotives on northbound railroad tracks, as Dogging Around did that summer after college. It can be any number of ensemble riffs or solo licks that also go with barbershops and shoeshine parlors, with cigar smoke and the smell and taste of sealed fresh whiskey, with baseball scores and barbecue pits and beer-seasoned chicken shack tables, with skillets of sizzling mullets, a bream of golden crisp oysters, plus grits and butter, and with such white potato salads and such sweet potato pies as only down-home folks remember from picnics and association time camp meetings. Or it can be a stage show at the old Apollo Theater, which sometimes used to rock like a church during revival time. It can be the jukebox evangelism of some third-rate but fad-successful soul singer, so-called, that carries you back not only to Alabama boyhood Sundays with sermons followed by dasher-turned ice cream, but also to off-campus, hillside, roadside beer joints and Alabama pine needle breezes.
I'm Cheryl Hurley, president of the Library of America, and we are very proud to publish the first and only collection of Albert Murray's writing, expertly assembled by Henry Louis Gates and Paul Devlin. Whoops, this thing is a little scary here. Okay. That's it. Just doesn't want to bend, okay? Good, I'll stay clear. The volume brings together 6 of Murray's brilliant books on race, class, the South, jazz, and the blues, and confirms why Murray is one of our most essential writers. His singular poetic voice, impassioned argument, and pluralistic vision are perhaps more relevant today than ever. For those who may not know, the Library of America is a nonprofit publisher and cultural institution dedicated to publishing America's greatest writers in authoritative editions that are kept permanently in print. The idea is to make our written heritage, the heritage we all share, permanently available and widely available to new audiences to appreciate, in this case, Murray's writing. Professor Gates has served on our board for many years and is one of our chief cheerleaders. The Murray volume is number 284 in the Library of America series and joins Walt Whitman, Abraham Lincoln, W.B. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston, James Baldwin, Flannery O'Connor, and many others. So with the publication of this volume, Albert Murray is now officially in the American literary canon. Our first speaker will be Lewis Jones, followed by David Murray, Henry Louis Gates Jr., Paul Devlin, then Paul and David Murray together, with a musical finale by the David Murray Quintet. Please welcome Lewis Jones.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Cheryl. Wanted to just spend a few moments saying thank you as the executor of the Albert Murray Estate and the trustee of the Albert Murray Trust. Thank you to the Library of America for bringing this first volume forward. Thank you, Professor Gates, who serves on the board of the Library of America and also will recount his own personal relationship with Albert Murray. But the Hutchins Center, Professor Gates, have been stalwart, as always, friends and keepers of the flame as we continue what has been a celebration of what would have been Albert Murray's 100th anniversary birth. I want to pick up on that pause and that the voice that you just heard of Albert Murray in South to a Very Old Place. We met here in Cambridge about, it's going on 45, 44 years ago. And in the course of that time, he would remark that, like South to a Very Old Place, he had to go north to meet me when it turned out, as we learned more about each other, I grew up just a block away from him in Harlem, where we spent so many of his years when he came to New York City. But the route north through Cambridge happened through what is always an amazing Harvard connection. I think many of us who've spent time in Cambridge will agree that springtime, fall time, whenever Harvard is in session, school's in session, you can meet anyone who's important, anyone you thought was important, anyone who just thinks they are important in the square. And my introduction to Albert Murray was at the equivalent of the, well, what is an Ivy League barbershop, if you will. It's called the Andover Shop. And you know, when Professor Gates buys American, that's where he goes. Paul Devlin has an Andover tie on. I got my graduation suit from there, and this is not it, but Lee Daniels, class of 71, who also was an Andover Shop devotee, well, took me over to see Charlie Davidson, and we had this idea about having a special issue of the Harvard Advocate. I hope some Advocate folks here at all? Well, let them know they were spoken of in glowing terms, that to have this special issue. And at the time we went to the Andover Shop, we only had a working title in mind and nothing else. It was called Black Odyssey, A Search for Home. And whatever that meant was to be found out. But that space was filled quite quickly because through Lee Daniels, I got to Charlie Davidson. And from Charlie Davidson, I got to meet Albert Murray. He and Albert Murray had become friends while Albert Murray was in the Air Force out here at Haskell Air Force Base. He was a retired major in the Air Force. And coincidentally, Charlie is also an Air Force veteran. But to talk about their relationship, I think will give you a sense of how family works by election and not by blood. And so a bit about Charlie, and just briefly, because to hear about Charlie is to understand more about Albert Murray in a way. So Charlie Davidson, who can't be with us today, he's under the weather, but recently turned 90. And Charlie, in addition to Professor Gates and Paul and myself, if Cornel West were here, he also is a patron, but those of more, even more iconic stature, perhaps. In addition to Albert Murray, Ralph Ellison. And Miles Davis during his GQ period of the 50s and early 60s, if you look at some of his vinyl albums, you'll still see him in pretty sharp-looking suits and jackets. So that was Charlie as well. And so from that, though, I was introduced to the, Paul terms of phrase, Cosmos Murray, and what a world that is. So his idea was, look, we're at Harvard. Why don't we have as the central idea around this advocate issue a discussion? And we'll name it after a very famous Black Harvard grad. We'll name it after Elaine L. Locke, a name that the Hutchins Center has kept in preservation in terms of its iconic stature. So he was the class of 1908, member of the class of 1908. He graduated in 07, 3 years, and the first Black Rhodes Scholar. So there, Albert Murray, you know, sets the connection there with Harvard. And then he goes a step further and brings his buddy Ralph Ellison. At that time, we're talking, you know, 73. That was right after the late 60s. Ellison had pretty much been run off of many campuses because of the militant attitude of many students, Black students in particular, and thinking his approach and ultimately Murray's approach were antiquated and not of relevance at that time. Did not have a path for understanding the role of Negroes in American culture, the mulatto nature of American culture, et cetera, et cetera. But with that, we built upon that, and Dean Archie Epps was the Dean of Students then, so that funded actually the symposium itself. So that got, in addition to Murray and Ellison, we had Harold Cruz and Nathan Huggins, who obviously later came to Harvard as well. The point of all this, in a way, before I get to the reading, is that one of Murray's main points, he has many, but among them is that, you know, a lot of the blues is the antidote, temporary though it may be, from the second law of thermodynamics, you know, chaos, entropy, and all that stuff, where the universe tends to go. And there's a sense of order that we all try to seek, and art helps us preserve that. But his metaphor in his writing, which will be brought forward in Volume 2 of Library of America, is really his fiction. So I want to read a little bit, because the blues is a Murray metaphor. I want to read a little bit about his take on shades of blue. The color you almost always remember when you remember Little Buddy Marshall is sky blue. Because that shimmering summer sunshine blueness in which neighborhood hens used to cackle, while distant yard dogs used to bark, and mosquito hawks used to flit and float along nearby barbed wire fences, was a boy's color. Because such blueness also meant that it was whistling time and rambling time, and also baseball time. Because that silver bright mid-afternoon sky above outfields was the main thing Little Buddy Marshall and I were almost always most likely to be wishing for back in those days, when we used to make up our own dirty verses to that old song, "It Ain't Gonna Rain No More, No More." But the shade of blue and blueness you always remember whenever, and for whatever reason you remember Louisiana Charlie, is steel blue, which is also the clean, oil-smelling color of gunmetal, and the gray-purple patina of freight train engines and railroad slag. Because in those days, that was a man's color, even as tobacco plus black coffee was a man's smell. And Louisiana Charlie also carried a blue steel 3220 on a 44 frame in his underarm holster. His face and hands were leather brown, like dark rawhide. But blue steel is the color you always remember when you remember how his guitar used to sound. Sometimes he used to smell like coffee plus Prince Albert cigarettes, which he rolled himself. And sometimes it was a White Owl cigar. And sometimes it was Brown's mule chewing tobacco. But when he was wearing slick starched, wash-faded blue denim overalls, plus tucked-in jumper, plus his black and white houndstooth check cap, plus high-top, glove-soft, banker-style Stacey Adams, which was what he almost always traveled in, he also smelled like green oak steam. And when he was dressed up in his tailor-made broadcloth, box-back plus peg-top hickory striped pants, plus either silk candy stripe or silk pongee shirt, plus knitted tie and diamond stick pin, plus an always brand new, gingerly blocked black John B. Stetson hat, because he was on his way to somewhere either to gamble or to play his guitar. What he smelled like was barbershop talcum and crisp new folding money. I can remember being aware of Louisiana Charlie all the way back there in the blue meshes of the wee winkling, blinkling, and nod web of bedtime story time, when I couldn't yet follow the thread of the yarns I was to realize later on that somebody was forever spinning about something he had done. Back when all of that was mainly grown folks talking among themselves and by the fireside or the swing porch, as if we were not even there, saying Louisiana, Louisiana, and old Louisiana, and old Luz. And I didn't know what to say, nothing of where Louisiana was. But I already knew who he himself was even then, And I could see him very clearly whenever they said his name, because I still can't remember the point in time when I had not already seen him coming up that road from around the bend and down in the L&N Railroad bottom. Nor can I remember when I had not yet heard him playing the blues on his guitar as if he were also an engineer, telling the tales on a train whistle. His left hand doing the most of the talking, including the laughing and signifying, as well as the moaning and crying, and even the whining, while his right hand thumped the wheels, going somewhere. Then there was also his notorious holler, the sound of which was always far away and long coming, as if from somewhere way down under. Most of the time, but not always, it started low, like it was going to be a moan or even a song, and then it jumped all the way to the very top of his voice, and then suddenly broke off. Then it came back, and this time, it was already at the top. Then, as often as not, he would make 3 or 4, or sometimes 3 followed by 4, bark like squalls, and let it die away in the darkness. You remember it mostly as a nighttime sound. And Mama always used to say he was whooping and hollering like somebody back on the old plantations and back in the old turpentine woods. And one time Papa said, maybe so, but it was more like one of them old Louisiana swamp hollers the Cajuns did in the shrimp bayous. But I myself always thought of it as being something else that was like a train, a bad express train, saying, look out, this me, and here I come, and I'm coming through one more time. I'm going to close out with this coda and then give the floor over to David. But, you know, we're coming up on, I guess, close to the 47th anniversary of the Omni Americans. And for those of you who've read it, basically it kind of anticipates where we are today as a nation. Even though the period of publication was 1970, that in fact, we are a nation, we're all mixed up, it's a mulatto nation, and now the demographics have caught up with Murray's observation even then. And so the only hyphenation ultimately he was focusing on, because he saw this mixture as a good thing frankly in the spirit of the founding fathers, is omni-Americans. So with that in mind, this is Premier Cru USA. American social science surveys technicians whose modus operandi, ne sine qua non, is segregation, continue to proliferate norms and deviations that are invariably skewed to support the folklore of white supremacy and the fake lore of black pathology. But the anecdotes that most immigrants find most representative are those Horatio algorithm that relate and reiterate how the white human trash of Europe interacting with the other human trash of West Africa and elsewhere is in accomplishing what the redskin elite of the forest primeval had no Aztec, Inca, Mayan, or Toltec plans for, became the demographic cream of the crop that by the mid-20th century had already rendered the Almanach de Gotha obsolete. Who is due at the castle for dinner and global negotiations bearing non-Greek appropriations? The progeny of all that, Mayflower, Middle Passage, and steerage, flotsam and jetsam, Your Highness, that's who. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, David Murray.
Well, it's very nice to be here in the midst of all of this, this fine university, and I'm very happy to have a book of all of Al's work. I witnessed him writing some of these, and he had a formula, and he showed me his formula, how he writes the book. He takes it over here to the other side, and it's this meeting Al was one of the great moments of my life, and Mr. Gates, and we thank you for having us here, and Mr. Devlin, and thank you for being one of Al's proteges as well. We all are proteges of Al. I met Al several times, but I used to always run into him at Father Demo Square near Bleecker Street. He would always go to Murray's Cheese Shop. I don't know why, but I would always see him, and he would say, "Oh, another Murray," you know. So I invited him to my son's first birthday party, Hudson and Charles, and we had to climb down. We had a place where we had to climb down into the, had to go through the kitchen window and climb down to the terrace. And he and Moselle and Michelle came, and they all had on white, you know, and they didn't get dirty. It was great. So Al was very much a part of all of us. Just going to read from Stompin' the Blues, chapter 8, the introduction, Swinging the Blues. Val. Once they started making phonograph records of it, you could hear it almost any time of the day or almost any time of the week and almost anywhere that was far enough away from the church. Because not only did there seem to be at least one phonograph in almost every neighborhood from the very outset, but it was also as if it was the music that phonograph records were all about in the first place, which is incidentally is also why the Victrola and the gramophone, which were also called the graphola and the talking machine, began by being condemned in so many Sunday morning sermons as the diabolical apparatus of the devil's agents of wickedness. Before the first phonograph records, there were the singing guitar strummers and pickers, and sometimes some harmonica blowers also, who used to play strolling in halftime or deliberately out of time along the street, and while stashed on certain busy corners or sitting on a certain storefront benches. And sometimes when not working in the honky-tonks until the wee hours of the morning like the piano players, they also used to play in certain yards, on certain porches in the summer twilight, and by certain firesides in the wintertime. And sometimes there was also used to be one, if not several, on that part of the picnic grounds and in that part of the baseball field where the moonshine drinkers and gamblers and sports and fancy women usually gathered, enjoying their own good time between the innings as much as the game itself. Sometimes the dance orchestras, which were called social bands or ragtime bands and jazz bands, but never blues bands or orchestras, always used to play at the picnics and at baseball games, especially when it was also a holiday such as the 4th of July, Labor Day, and afterwards at the dances in all the big ballrooms as well as all the honky-tonks. Because there were ballroom dances to celebrate every holiday of the year in addition to all the other special social occasions not sponsored by the church. There were also the traveling minstrels and the vaudeville shows in those days. They used to stop and play the villages and small towns and move to the big city theater for the next weekend. And sometimes when they pulled in early enough, they also used to send the orchestra around on a truck with the upright piano jangling and tinkling behind the driver's cabin, the slide trombone tiger ragging out through the tailgate opening, with the woodwinds doubling in the background and the trumpet climbing up and away, echoing across the rooftops and steeples, and all the way out beyond the trees to the hills and the outlying regions. Sometimes there was also the singer whose picture was on the advanced placards, pasted up all over town, especially if it was somebody like, say, Ma Rainey, Ida Cox, Bessie Clare, or Mamie, or Trixie Smith. But singers were mostly to be seen and anticipated while the barkers spilled the come on through a megaphone. The old down-home ragtime and barrel house piano players used to play, and more often than not, also sing at night, because except for late Saturday afternoon and the late Sunday afternoon, that was when most people used to go to the honky-tonks during the week. So when you were either not old yet old enough, or to be allowed out that late, or you were too good of a church member ever to be caught in such places. You heard the piano players mostly in the distance. But sometimes when business was good enough, some of them also used to play during the weekday afternoons, and you could hear them from the street. But the best time for honky-tonk piano players and blues singers back in those days was always Saturday night, because the down-home work week began what it was. It was when most people were out for a good time. And along with all the good barbecue, fried chicken, seafood, and all the whiskey and all the cigars and cigarettes and shaving lotions, hair pomade, and perfume and powder, almost everywhere you went, there was also music for dancing. And it went on and on into the night, and sometimes until daybreak Sunday morning. Albert Murray. Okay.
Thank you, David. That was great. If you don't mind. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. It's a great day for me. It's a great honor to be part of the program today, and certainly to be the co-editor with Paul Devlin of the Library of America's collected works of Albert Murray. There are two people really who made this project happen. I mean, Cheryl and I have the pleasure of being on the board, and our friend Betsy Smith's in the audience, and we love, and our fellow board member, and we love the Library of America. But it wasn't us, really. This was being hounded by Lewis Jones for years and years and years, and then by Paul Devlin. And Lewis kept saying, you know, you need a Library of America volume on Albert Murray. And for those of you who don't know, it's a two-step process. One, the intellectual process. We have to decide as a board which authors meet our editorial standards to be included in the Library of America. But the second is financial. We're not-for-profit, and we have to, these volumes cost what, Cheryl, $50,000? We need to get each one published, and we encourage a person to adopt a volume or to be a patron. So I kept telling Lewis, I think I can handle the intellectual part if you handle the financial part. And finally, he believed me. He would send me over and over, he'd say, this is the intellectual reason that Al Murray should be canonized. I said, damn it, I know the intellectual reason. I need the financial show up so that we can persuade the board that this is also a good idea, that we can support this project. And that I said that on one condition I would be involved, if I could be involved with Paul Devlin, because he is the most devoted, scholarly acolyte and protege that an author could possibly have. He knows everything about Albert Murray. He was devoted to him in life, and just as devoted, if not more so, in death. So I would like for you all to give it up to Lewis Jones and to Paul Devlin for making this possible. I got to know Albert Murray when I was 28 years old, and I was an assistant professor down at Yale. Robert O'Meally, who was at the time, he's at Columbia now, he was teaching at Wesleyan, and he dragged me down to New York to meet Al Murray, I couldn't believe it, to his apartment uptown and to interview him. We spent hours there. It was great. It was magical. And O'Meally brought the little cassette tape, and he recorded this, right? And so I kept bugging him about when he was going to get the transcript to me, and we could edit it, and it was because it was such a marvelous interview. And he would refuse to answer. And finally, I cornered him. I said, Bob, why don't you give me the tape? And he goes, I've lost the tape. He couldn't find the tape. And I couldn't believe it, because we got Murray talking about things he'd never talked about, and he felt comfortable, and we were there all day drinking and talking trash, so people say anything that comes to mind. And every once in a while I would think of it, Cheryl, and think, man, this great moment in African-American letters has been lost. And as Lewis said, this is Murray's centenary. This is his 100th anniversary. And on his birthday, Bob O'Meally sent me an email saying he had found the tape. That interview was done in 1978, and he found the tape. So we immediately had it transcribed. Paul edited it, and the Paris Review just published it, when? Last month. Yeah. So you can all, you can buy it, and you can read it. It's in the current edition. I used to take, after that, we established a relationship. Can I have that water, Paul, please? So after that meeting, thank you, we established something of a relationship. And he would invite me to come down from New Haven to meet him and Romare Bearden. Now, those of you who don't know, Romare Bearden is a great collagist, a great painter. Certainly with Jacob Lawrence, one of the two great African-American painters of their generation and of all time. And we meet at a place on Madison Avenue called Books and Company, which is no longer there. We would have lunch at this little diner next door, and Romare Bearden would get the same fruit salad every week, and all he would do would be push it around, you know, and I thought, well, maybe the fruit's hard. Then I thought, well, maybe he really doesn't like it, or maybe he's remembering fruit salad. He used to have a platonic fruit salad, and at every fruit salad he's going to get after that, it's going to be inadequate. Then finally I realized he just liked it for the colors, because he was a painter. He was just pushing the colors around. Great way to take a diet, go on a diet, I guess. Then we would have this lunch, then we go next door to Books and Company. And one of them, they sort of unofficially took turns. I was 28, I was an assistant professor. I had no money. It was enough that I could pay the train ticket to get down from New Haven. And we would wander through the rows and rows of books, and they would say, well, have you read Rilke's Letters? And I'd say no, and one of them would buy it and give it to me to read, like a reading assignment. And then next week when I went back, they'd say, well, what'd you think of Rilke's Letter to so-and-so and so-and-so? Or they would buy Kenneth Burke on Form or something and give it to me to read. But then we would go down to Canal Street, where Romare Bearden lived. And he would show me, he had these huge vats, I call them, long shelf-like things that you put prints in. And you know, you've all seen it in poster shops, you can flip through. And he would say, this would be the end of the day, he would say, which one of these do you like? And I would say, oh, I love this one from the Odyssey series, let's say. And I would look at it, and I would say, well, how much would that cost if you bought that commercially? And he would say, well, how much could you afford to pay if you were going to buy it? And I'd say, well, maybe $500 if I could give you 3 checks post-dated over, and maybe once or twice one of those even bounced, you know. And so that's how I began to collect Romare Beardens, and I have an amazing collection, many of which I've donated to the Cooper Gallery here at Harvard, which is part of the Hutchins Center. That was the greatest Saturdays I've ever spent in my life, and what an education that I was blessed to have from Al Murray and Romare Bearden, who had a very, very special friendship. And in fact, Romy's book, The Painter's Mind, Al had a lot to do with, and Romare Bearden's History of African American Art, I think Al actually wrote. They were 2 parts, flip sides of the same sensibility. You know, I think of it as the Ellingtonian and the Ellisonian almost. That what one painted, the other was able to put into words. Really, Ellington, Ellison, Murray, and Bearden are all cut from the same cloth. And that would be a great book, actually, to talk about the nonverbal music of Ellington, the nonverbal collages of Bearden, and then the wordsmithing of Ellison and Murray, who are very similar, but as you could hear when Lewis and David read, you know, they come with a different kind of tone. And similar but different, and both profound. When I was a sophomore at Yale, it was 1969, 1970, when the Omni Americans was published. And one of my professors told me to read it. And it was life-changing. You know, people use that term in a hyperbolic way, and they abuse its significance. But here was a guy saying, you had to stand up to intellectual bullies. He said two things. As Lewis said, that America's a mulatto. And his metaphor for that, it was the phrase, the Omni-Americans. That that there was no black without white, there was no white without black, that black and white are mutually constitutive in the United States. And in an era of black nationalism, that hadn't really occurred to me. The second thing he said was you have to stand up to intellectual bullies. Don't let, and the two bullies that Lewis cited, his two bugbears were, one, what he called social science, the social science fiction monster. The social science fiction monster invented a Negro, invented a black experience, and then wanted you to conform to what, you know, some sociologists here at Harvard had imagined black people to be, rather than to go into the vernacular world of black people and write about them inductively, listen to what they had to say, the way they described their lives, and generalize from there. The second bugbear, intellectual black bullies. People trying to tell you how to be black. And believe me, in 1970, there were a lot of people running around trying to tell young black people like me how to be black. There was the Black Panthers telling you had to be a socialist. There was Stokely Carmichael and SNCC trying to tell you how to be black nationalists. There were black Muslims, of course, with trying to induce you to join Elijah Muhammad's particular kind of Islam. People telling you who your friends could be, who you could date, that how many inches your afro had to be, you know, how many dashikis you had, and what the secret soul handshake was every month, which we changed to make sure you were still black. And what Murray said was that you have to think for the long term. Think about what speaks to you in the middle of the night. Think about the black experience as you experience in a barbershop or a beauty parlor, or when you go home, or when you're really sitting around the living room with your family and no one's being politically correct. And that was liberating for me. I have right now, everybody knows where I live. Right now, if you break in, you could see the Omni Americans first edition paperback right by my bed. And every once in a while, I revert to that because it gives me a kind of courage to stand up, to remember, to try to hear that voice, you know, the voice of the black experience, the voice that speaks to me, the voice that seems resonant and speaks true. And that's what Murray identified. And Murray, well, bad pun, but called a spade. I mean, he would stand up within the race and call these people out who he thought were being bullies or bullshitting or, you know, just tripping. And I admired his courage and thought, even at the age of 20, my God, would I ever have the courage to, it's not just only, it's one thing to speak truth to power. You know, we can stand here and wolf on Donald Trump at the White House, they're a long way away. But Murray would stand to Stokely Carmichael's face and tell him that he was excessive, and tell him that he needed to pull back, or tell him that his rhetoric was inappropriate. That's the kind of courage that I first saw exemplified in the Omni Americans, and that inspired me, I think, deep down to try to become, as we used to say, a man of letters, a person of letters. He was a model of subtlety that I've tried to follow throughout my own career, and it's an honor. It's an honor to be co-editor of a volume dedicated to this great man. So give it up to Al Murray, would you please? Please. In his absence. All right, I'm going to read something that was uncollected and unpublished until we published it in our Library of American volume. It's called Soul, 32 Meanings Not in Your Dictionary, 1968. In recent months, a new word, or rather an old word with new meanings, has been appearing with increasing frequencies in novels, news stories, and conversations. To help dictionary editors, here is a full definition that they can clip and file. That's how he introduced it. Soul. 1, of pertaining to, indigenous to, associated with U.S. Negroes, that is to say, native-born, black, brown-skinned, mulatto U.S. citizens of full or partial, direct or remote African descent. 2, U.S. Negro style, especially as reflecting the folk idiom of Southern Negroes. 3, style or any stylistic element or device characterized by features with roots in the folkways of Negroes of the South, that is to say, down south, namely down home. 4, anything expressive of down home roots. 5, hence also earthiness, often as in down home church services, but also secular, as in work songs, blues, chants, hollers, epithets, and exclamations. But not restricted, as by hung-up white hippies, to obscenity, profanity, and pseudo-dialect. 6, any unpretentious seeming Negro behavior. 7, but also sophistication, as in any Negro stylization in which references and meanings are signified by gesture and innuendo, rather than stated outright in conventional terms familiar to whites. 8, hence anything that makes Negroes laugh, but that puzzles most whites present. 9, any black-oriented behavior, any black behavior in the interest of a black cause. 10, any word or statement suggesting resentment or rejection of white folks. 11, any aesthetic projection expressive of black American experience. 12, the U.S. Negro accent as when introduced into anything not Negro. For example, is where Negro dance rhythms are added to pop and classical music and to military drill, etc. 13, currently, any provincial or countrified behavior acceptable to northern city Negroes. I like that. 14, anything that becomes a fad in Harlem. 15, any quality considered positive and assumed to be Negro by U.S. Negroes. 16, anything assimilated by U.S. Negroes. African robes and ornaments do not become soul threads until worn by U.S. Negro dandies. 17, any Negro thing imitated by white people. Probable derivation, soulful, adjective with feeling, as in a soulful performance or interpretation, especially of music and dance, but as adapted by U.S. Negroes and applied specifically to the rendition of nuances of music and subtleties of dance movements expressive of U.S. Negro lifestyle. 18, hence adjective, authentic, as from deeply felt human passion expressive of innermost being as opposed to artificial or phony. 19, expression which reflects knowledgeability earned through profoundly personal involvement. 20, black motherwit as opposed to white theory. 21, the ability to riff, that is to improvise or take care of business in the Negro idiom. 22, hence, to employ elements of the down-home style. Man, the splibs were souling then and them honkies forgot it. If you can't soul it, you might as well hang it up, bro. 23, also a likely variation of soul, spirit, synonym, spirit, essence, core, heart, embodiment. Hence, anything expressive of fundamental human, that is to say, Negro sentiment. 24, hence by implication, the human dimension as defined by Negroes. 25, also vulgate, the nitty-gritty of anything, being or state of being, also construed as being from the soul, as synonymous with the heart or core of beings as opposed to from the head. In the terminology of jazz, however, from the head indicates the opposite of playing or singing from a written score. In this sense, from the head means from the depths of the soul. 26, also any U.S. Negro, male or female, as in a soul, the souls, etc. There were 3 souls and a gang of Charlies out there, and I mean uptight, man, and the brothers fit to do their thing. From soul brother and soul sister, frequently shortened to brother and sister, and bro and brer as in traditional church parlance, but currently less frequently to sis. In black nationalist, internationalist political jargon, all black people are soul brothers. But in strict usage, only those whose heritage includes spirituals and blues and gospel are so designated. Those from West Indian, Calypso, Afro-Latin backgrounds, for example, are somewhat more like soul cousins, except on certain political issues. Black African continentals are soul relatives by virtue of a common dance beat-oriented ancestry. But those who speak English with a colonial British or French accent can hardly be said to speak soul, an indispensable prerequisite for acceptance into the inner sanctum of stone soulhood. Stokely, who's West Indian, is a close cuz. Rap is a stone bro. 27. Also down-home recipe cooking, as in soul food, soul feast, soul table, but not soul bread, which is money. Sometimes construed as food for the soul, but more often the traditional food of soul people. Hence a down-home menu, or any item therefrom, including but not limited to the following when prepared from down-home recipes. Black-eyed peas, also with rice, namely Bucket George. Red beans with rice, collards, cornbread, crackling bread, hoe cakes, cornmeal dumplings and turnip and mustard greens, chicken, southern fried, also baked with highly spiced cornmeal and onion stuffing, also with dumplings, chitlins, crab gumbo, catfish, fish head stew, grits, eggs, and streakoline, molasses and flapjacks, molasses with bacon grease and biscuits, buttermilk with crumbled cornbread, pork ad infinitum, pig's feet, tails, ears, head, hogs, rabbit. My father used to say they were so poor, they ate every part of the pig but the oink. Rabbit, fried or stewed, possum or coon with yams, sweet potato pie and pone, jelly layer cake, etc. 28. Also the U.S. Negro idiom and music. 29. But in the argot of contemporary disc jockeys and record promotion copy, secularized gospel music, commercialized originally for the Negro pop music trade. 30, the beautiful sonorities of such singers as Ray Charles, James Brown, Jackie Wilson, and Aretha Franklin, when redolent of such church sisters as Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Clara Ward, and Mahalia Jackson, among others. 31, its current vogue among the young Afro-Brillo civil rights militants and separatists notwithstanding, soul is still music which goes with the robust Negro genre of rawhide beneath patent leather elegance. 32, hence a musical equivalent to processed hairdos, conchs, and stocking caps, weekend wigs, colorful high sheen fabrics, and showbiz fashions. Soul music is almost always misrepresented in the folklore of white supremacy as being a manifestation of the culture of the poverty of culture, which only goes to show who souls and who freaks out. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paul Devlin, and I would like to start by thanking Cheryl, David, Lewis, and Skip for their very kind words. Well, I have a wonderful announcement to make, and that announcement is that Albert Murray's archive is now in its entirety here at Harvard University. Amen. And Murray transferred about half of his archive here in 1998, and half of it was kept in his apartment. And after he passed away in 2013, Lewis Jones gave me the enormous privilege of supervising a team to inventory that archive and to find out exactly what was there and what should be done with it. Murray first involved me in his archive circa 2002. I met him in 2001. Around 2002, he started to let me know what hidden treasures were there in his archive, such as, for instance, an 80-page unpublished interview with Dizzy Gillespie, which was published last spring in a book that I edited called Murray Talks Music. There were also 14 tapes of interviews that he did with the legendary Papa Joe Jones, Count Basie's drummer, which he had hoped to turn into a book and which he very kindly allowed me to turn into a book, and that was published in 2011. It's called Riptide. And so I knew a little something about Murray's archive, and I set about with Lewis's blessing and encouragement and facilitation to find out exactly what was there. And I supervised a team which included 2 Irish guys, one Jewish guy, and 2 African American women. Sounds like a setup for a joke, but the joke is on the folklore of white supremacy. Because it was an omni-American team. And everyone on the team, by the way, was affiliated with St. John's University in New York. And so it was an omni-American team. And to be an omni-American is to understand what is the most American aspects of American culture. And Murray argued that the most American features of American culture were African American. And African American history and culture is indispensable to an omni-American understanding of American culture. So it could have been a team with 3 people from Finland, Paraguay, and Zimbabwe, and it could have been an equally omni-American team. So anyway, we completed the project, and it was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of work, but the archive is here now at Harvard, and it's really special. There's a lot of material, and I hope that scholars and students will make good use of it. An archive is defined not only by what's in it, but also by what is excluded from it. Some of you may be thinking, didn't Jacques Derrida say that in Archive Fever? Yes, sure. But Murray said something very similar, which I'm going to get to. Murray would have said, well, that's good, but I'm going to get to Murray's riff on that particular feature, that particular paradox of memory, that memory and forgetfulness are intertwined. But I just want to say a word or two about his archive. As I said, an archive is defined not only by what's in it, but by what's not in it. And, you know, Murray didn't save a scrap of paper pertaining to either of his 2 sets of parents, his biological parents or his adoptive parents. But he assiduously saved every letter he sent when he tried to get out of jury duty. But the real treasure of the archive, I think, one of the treasures, are 39 letters that he wrote to his wife, Moselle. And these 39 letters are just, they're diverse in terms of subject matter, they're beautifully written, and they're just like a slice of life from 1950 to 1962, and it would be wonderful if they could be published in a short book someday. About half of them were written while Murray was studying at the Sorbonne in Paris in 1950, which is around the time he met Bearden, James Baldwin, and so many others. So that's those 39 letters are one of the treasures, but they are one set of treasures among many in a vast and rich and complicated archive. So I'm going to read 3 selections, and I call this, this pastiche that I put together, Once Upon a Time with Albert Murray. This is a riff on one of Murray's favorite phrases, once upon a time, along with his glosses on it. The first 3 of these passages appear in the Library of America edition of Murray's work, the first volume, which is out now. And one of the passages is from a draft of something. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, once upon a time became current circa 1595, when it replaced the older phrase once on a time, which seems to have replaced the 14th century phrase once upon a day. Incidentally, Murray is quoted in the OED 13 times, mostly with regards to jazz terminology. So, from South to a Very Old Place. Such is the miraculous nature of memory and make-believe, and hence the very essence of human consciousness, that not only do forgetfulness and recollection go hand in hand, they are in truth indispensable to each other. Thus, sometimes, even in the most immediate press of circumstances, and consequently, for the most urgent pragmatic intents and purposes, when you say antebellum, you are not only conceiving, but functioning in terms of something antediluvian. Even as, perhaps, most people in the United States have long since begun to think, quote, prehistoric, unquote, when they say pre-Columbian. Nor is pre-Columbian Europe conceived by them as being less aboriginal than the Western Hemisphere before Columbus. Nor is such recollective forgetfulness in any fundamental sense unrelated to the reciprocal interaction of mythology and actuality in the whole question of your personal identity. For more often than not, when you say slavery time, folks back in slavery time, grandma and grandpa back on the olden days of the old plantation, you are neither thinking nor feeling in terms of the literal time involved. You are almost always thinking once upon a time. After all, isn't the oldness of Uncle Remus, who is of necessity less old than Aunt Hagar, mother of us all, every bit as ancient as the oldness of Aesop? And from The Hero in the Blues, aesthetic considerations as types of narrative statement involve such ethical matters as categories of heroic action, and thus is the storyteller's moral obligation or social commitment inherent in his craft. The art of fiction is an art of make-believe. It is therefore, and precisely by the same token, also an art of persuasion, and perhaps even propaganda. But what the storyteller, in his capacity as artist, wants those who respond to the fortunes of the storybook hero to believe, goes far beyond the credibility of any given political formulation. Even when the specific political issues motivate the plot he is recounting, the storyteller's point of view is still that of the fable underlying all drama. Once upon a time, there was someone who somehow did or did not achieve that favorable, no matter how delicate balance between essential human values on the one hand and cosmic absurdity as well as political outrage on the other. And now from the Blue Devils of Nada, the unmistakable implication of the traditional narrative expression once upon a time is, quote, time after time, in place after place, such and such came to pass, unquote. The storyteller fabricates, composes, generalizes, and, if only by implication, moralizes. Hence, human existence, he postulates, is thus and so. For example, time after time, there was and is a man whose circumstances were and are such and such, and he did and does this and that, and the outcome was and is likely to be as follows. All of which goes to show what human existence is really like. Therefore, human conduct should be like this and not like that. And finally, to say once upon a time is to be very accurate about what will follow. You're warned that you'll be dealing with ambiguity. You'll be dealing with metaphor. Once upon a time, in a place far away, or not so long ago, in a place not so far away, it may or may not be of significance to you, but it's worth knowing. And so, I will now move on to a few of Murray's poems, which I'm going to read with the accompaniment of some members of the band. And while they come out, I suppose I can just riff and improvise for a minute until the band members come out.
We're going to go out there so we can watch.
Okay. Well, I'd like to correct the record briefly. I not only have an Andover shop tie on, but I do have an Andover shop jacket on as well. Cut the riffing short. Ladies and gentlemen, the David Murray Quintet, and we have Mingus Murray on guitar. We have Rashawn Carter on bass. We have Russell Carter on drums. Craig Harris on trombone. And David Murray on tenor saxophone. The David Murray Quintet. Now, Albert Murray did not write these poems with music in mind. These poems were not written with any specific musical analog. But as we were studying them, as I was going over these with David over the last couple of weeks, we perceived a certain musicality in them. And we thought that maybe we could put them to music in a sense. And we'll try to do that for you now. So this is from Murray's one and only volume of poetry, Conjugations and Reiterations. It will be republished in its entirety in the second volume of the Library of America, definitive edition of Albert Murray's work, which will be published in February of next year. So without further ado, this poem is called KC-44. KC is in Kansas City. KC-44. said the nothing, if not pragmatic, William James Basie, the trigger-fingered count from Edmund Wilson's Red Bank, New Jersey, by way of Kansas City, and by virtue of a not un-Walt Whitman-esque 4/4, beat, bite, and real guts under a good old post-ragtime syncopated shout with trumpet and/or trombone mutes, plungers and aluminum, plastic felt, derby fans will always put the blues deep down in the dozens. Talking about playing the dirty dozens with the devil. And if you don't play them, just pat your foot whilst I play them. Talking about how, like, the Oklahoma City Blue Devils used to stomp the Red Devils down in Slaughter's Hall and Ralph Ellison's other deep second joints. And remember, nothing is ever too slow or too fast to swing. And we're gonna read another poem for you. This is called Private Stock. Thelonious, the syncopating monk, whose preferred cloister sphere seemed to be the misty morning atmosphere of the after-hours joint, from which the last of the night-long merrymakers have departed. In all events, he seems, almost always to seem, to be resampling his honky-tonk piano, meditations and up-tempo stride-time etudes, as much for his own private edification as for the programmed entertainment of any paying audience. Indeed, Thelonious made music as some monks have always made and shared wine. Here's something to my taste. Try this, and how about this, or this? And by the way, the first tune to accompany the first poem was 1 O'Clock Jump by Count Basie. That was Bright Mississippi by Thelonious Monk. And finally, we have an untitled poem about Duke Ellington. And this will be accompanied by Take the A Train. From Washington, once a man, and now a town, came Ellington, once a man, and now a sound. That Astoriella Americana, as she is Swy Young. Up and down, and all around the globe. From Washington, once a man, and now a town, came Ellington, once a man, and now a sound. That Astoriella Americana, as she is Swy Young, up and down, and all around the globe. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will turn this over to the musical portion of our program. And I would just like to announce that David Murray has composed a new piece specifically for our event this afternoon. And it is called Scooter, after the protagonist of Albert Murray's 4 novels. So this is the world premiere of Scooter, which we are going to hear now.
Actually, we're gonna play a few more songs before we get to Scooter. We're gonna warm up to that. We're gonna start off with a morning song. going to play a piece that we call Roots and Wings. This is the composition we call Cycles and Seasons. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Albert Murray was a big fan of Billy Strayhorn, so we're gonna play Chelsea Bridge. This is the next piece. It's called Scooter really for Al. Okay.